On Sunday, April 29, 1945, just 1 week before the end of World War II in Europe, the U.S. 7th Army's 45th Infantry Division liberated Dachau, the first permanent concentration camp established by the Nazi regime. What awaited them was beyond imagination. The stench of human waste and rotting corpses filled the air, overwhelming the soldiers, many of whom broke down in tears or vomited at the sight. They discovered heaps of skeletal bodies, more than 30 railroad cars crammed with thousands of dead, and some 30,000 survivors, so starved and frail that many resembled walking skeletons. Thousands were gravely ill, and countless more would die in the months ahead from starvation and typhus outbreaks. The liberators, shaken and enraged, alongside survivors who had endured years of humiliation and brutality, were soon overcome by a desire for revenge. A violent reckoning was about to unfold. The origins of Dachau stretched back to the early years of the Nazi dictatorship. After Adolf Hitler became chancellor on January 30, 1933, the Nazis swiftly used terror to consolidate power. Their earliest concentration camps were designed to intimidate and silence political, social, and cultural opponents deemed dangerous to the regime. Within these camps, prisoners lived in perpetual fear of SS guards and their relentless cruelty. Dachau, located near Munich, was established in March 1933 as the very first camp of its kind. The first prisoners arrived on March 22, 1933. That October, Commandant Theodor Eicke introduced a harsh set of regulations, ensuring severe punishments for even the smallest infractions. Under Eicke, Dachau became both a model for the concentration camp system and a training ground, a school of violence for SS guards later deployed across Nazi-controlled Europe. Initially designed to hold 5,000 prisoners, Dachau's first inmates were mainly communists, social democrats, trade unionists, and other political opponents. Over time, the prisoner population expanded to include Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma and Sinti, homosexuals, repeat offenders, and those labeled asocials, individuals the regime considered unwilling or unable to work. In the early years, relatively few Jews were interned there, except for those punished under the Nuremberg laws or imprisoned after completing sentences. In 1937, the SS began using forced prisoner labor to expand the camp. Under brutal conditions, prisoners demolished the old munitions factory and constructed a new complex, completed by mid-August 1938. From then until 1945, the camp structure remained largely unchanged. The persecution of Jews intensified as Nazi policies radicalized. Following Kristallnacht on November 9 to 10, 1938, when Jewish homes, businesses, synagogues, schools, and hospitals were attacked, nearly 11,000 Jewish men were sent to Dachau. Many were released only after weeks or months of imprisonment, often on the condition that they emigrate from Germany. The camp itself was divided into two main sections, the prisoner compound and the crematoria. The compound held 32 barracks, including one for clergy who opposed the regime and another used for medical experiments. Administrative offices were housed in the gatehouse, while nearby stood kitchens, workshops, showers, and a notorious prison block known as the bunker. Here, rebellious or defiant prisoners were subjected to isolation, harsher conditions, torture, and execution. The courtyard between the bunker and the kitchen served as a site for summary shootings. Around the perimeter, electrified fences, guard towers, and trenches sealed the camp in an atmosphere of terror. With the outbreak of war on September 1, 1939, conditions inside Dachau deteriorated drastically. Prisoners endured lethal working hours, starvation rations, and unsanitary living conditions that fueled deadly epidemics. From 1940 onward, increasing numbers of prisoners from occupied countries across Europe were deported to Dachau. In 1942, a crematorium complex was added beside the camp, completing its machinery of death. The camp complex included both the old and the new crematorium, the latter equipped with a gas chamber. Yet, there is no credible evidence that this chamber was ever used for mass killings. Instead, prisoners deemed too weak or ill to continue working were selected and deported to the Hartheim, euthanasia center near Linz in Austria, where more than 2,500 Dachau inmates were murdered. Executions also took place within Dachau itself, initially in the bunker courtyard and later at a specially designed SS shooting range. Thousands of prisoners perished there, among them at least 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war captured after the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Beginning in 1942, German doctors conducted brutal medical experiments on Dachau prisoners. Luftwaffe physicians and researchers from the German Experimental Institute for Aviation carried out high-altitude and hypothermia experiments, as well as trials to desalinate seawater for survival purposes. These tests aimed to aid German pilots during bombing missions or those stranded in icy seas. Other experiments tested pharmaceuticals against malaria, tuberculosis, and other diseases. Hundreds of inmates died or were permanently maimed as a result of these inhumane trials. Dachau prisoners were also exploited as forced labor. They maintained the camp itself, worked on construction projects, and produced goods in small workshops. Many built roads, drained marshes, or worked in gravel pits under appalling conditions. As the war progressed, forced labor became increasingly crucial to the German armaments industry. By the summer and autumn of 1944, dozens of satellite camps were created under Dachau's administration, located near weapons factories across southern Germany. Dachau oversaw around 140 subcamps, mostly in Bavaria, where prisoners toiled almost exclusively in arms production. Thousands were literally worked to death. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, the SS began transferring prisoners from camps near the front lines to prevent their liberation. Trains and columns of prisoners arrived continuously at Dachau, worsening conditions dramatically. The camp soon held over 30,000 inmates, far beyond its capacity. Barracks built for 200 men were crammed with more than 1,600. Exhausted prisoners, after days of travel with little food or water, arrived on the brink of death. Overcrowding, starvation, and unsanitary conditions fueled a raging typhus epidemic, killing 100 to 200 prisoners every day. Of the 41,500 who died in Dachau between 1933 and 1945, more than one-third perished in the final 6 months of the war. In late April 1945, as Allied troops approached, the SS began evacuating Dachau. At least 25,000 prisoners were forced on brutal death marches toward Tyrol or loaded onto freight trains. Anyone too weak to continue was shot on the spot, while others succumbed to starvation, exhaustion, or exposure. Several thousand died during these marches. On April 29, 1945, U.S. forces reached the main camp. Before their arrival, Commandant Martin Weiss had already fled, but SS guards remained on duty. Some even fired at the approaching soldiers from the gate towers, only to surrender moments later with their hands raised. Yet nothing could have prepared the Americans for what they were about to see. The first sign was the smell. As they neared the camp, soldiers discovered over 30 railroad cars filled with corpses in various states of decomposition. The unbearable stench revealed the truth. This was the smell of death. Inside the camp, more bodies were scattered everywhere, many unclothed. Some collapsed only hours earlier, others stacked like wood. For the liberators, the horror was indescribable. The sight gave their struggle a new meaning. This was not just a war against an enemy. It was a war against absolute evil. The SS had tried desperately to burn the corpses before abandoning the camp, but the number of dead was too great. The evidence of atrocity remained, carved into the soil and memory of Dachau forever. One American soldier later recalled, "Everywhere you turned there were bodies, death, and human beings so broken and decayed that your mind simply could not take it in." Many soldiers collapsed in tears, while others were consumed by rage and hatred. When 4 German officers emerged from the woods waving a white handkerchief, a U.S. lieutenant forced them into one of the boxcars, already filled with corpses, and shot them with his pistol. As the mortally wounded Germans cried out in pain, another American officer finished them off. But that was only the beginning. The SS guards were ordered to line up along the coal yard wall near the guard tower. Lieutenant Walsh shouted, "Let them have it," and the Americans opened fire with rifles, pistols, and a .30 caliber machine gun. In less than half a minute, the guards were gunned down where they stood. Even then, the violence did not stop. The prisoners themselves, men and women who had endured years of torture, humiliation, and unimaginable cruelty, took their chance for revenge. Many had lost entire families. Some had seen their wives violated by SS men. Others had watched in horror as children were tossed into the air and used for target practice. Many had witnessed friends starve to death or perish during the death marches that took place only weeks earlier. Some had sworn sacred oaths that if they ever had the chance, they would kill their tormentors without hesitation. And now, they kept that promise. When SS guards were caught, they were beaten, stabbed, and stomped to death. Several capos, prisoners who had collaborated with the Nazis, were also lynched. One American soldier described seeing a prisoner smashing an SS man's face with his boot until, in his words, there was nothing left. Others were bludgeoned with sticks, shovels, or bare fists. Some SS men had tried to disguise themselves in prisoner uniforms, but they were recognized and executed on the spot. All the while, both U.S. soldiers and fellow inmates stood watching. Few intervened. One soldier admitted later, "We stood aside and watched as the guards were beaten to death. Beaten so savagely that their insides were ripped out. We felt less than if it were a dog being beaten. The truth is, we felt nothing at all. Our rage and hatred had numbed every emotion." When a kennel was discovered containing German Shepherds and Dobermans, many of the animals were shot. Rumors spread that political prisoners had been fed to these dogs. Later, American troops compelled Dachau's townspeople to enter the camp, to see with their own eyes what had been hidden in their midst. They were also forced to help bury the countless corpses. Many claimed afterward that they had no idea of the horrors that had been unfolding just outside their homes. To this day, the number of SS guards killed during the reprisals remains uncertain, with estimates ranging between 30 and 50. No one was ever tried for these actions, as General George S. Patton, then military governor of Bavaria, dismissed all charges. Between 1933 and 1945, more than 200,000 people were imprisoned in Dachau and its many subcamps. Nearly 42,000 of them were murdered.